So the first question I have here is, what was the single most surprising thing you learned about Saquon while reporting this piece? Um, the thing that surprised me the most was how disciplined he was. Because I think a lot of people just talk and don't act, I was really surprised that he was disciplined in that he said things that were very specific and he acted on those very specific things and carried through. So when he said he would invest his entire $31.2 million rookie contract and actually did it, um, he said that he would, just live off of his endorsements, and he did. The thing here that's interesting is that it was misreported in the press. They said that he invested that entire contract into like startups and venture. It's not true. He took that 31.2 million when he first joined the league and put it in the S&P 500. So it was way more conservative when he started, and then he diversified and increased his appetite for risk in other areas as he went. But that original money was in the S&P 500 largely. Um, and then and then in 2021, when he said, actually, I'm going to take, my marketing dollars and convert them into Bitcoin, that was also very surprising. Not a lot of athletes outside of Russell Kung at the time had done that. Um, so I think the most surprising thing is that he is very methodical and he is playing a very long-term game that I was surprised by to learn about. Okay, can you describe one moment during your reporting that made you think, oh, this is the heart of the story? Yes. The thing that I struggled with this story is that you could say Saquon Barkley wants to build ownership. He wants to, build equity, and he wants something long term. Therefore, he is investing in venture capital. The problem with that is it's kind of a paradox because, yes, you want ownership in these companies, but venture capital is quite risky and quite volatile. So, as many of you know, no matter how late stage a company may be, no matter how big and impressive a valuation they may have, it could still go to zero. You're taking a really massive risk, and most VCs will tell you don't invest unless you are ready for your investment to go to zero. Um, and I'm not sure that a lot of athletes like think about that or know that or think it's risky in that regard, but he does. Um, but he still does it because I think he thinks like I have control and I have a different relationship to risk by investing in companies versus just playing football. Yes, it's risky, but it's a risk that I can shape. It's a risk that I can control. So, for example, when Saquon invests in a company, he can then go put his reputation behind it, promote it, talk about it, meet with customers, meet with clients. He can shape and guide that risk versus just plain old risk. You don't know what's happening to your money. Um, so I think I wanted to capture the paradox of Saquon in that he is trying to build certainty by investing in an asset class that's not known for certainty. And it's like, how do you do that? Or I ended, let me see. I ended the first section with, in the end, Barkley must confront the question, is he building something that lasts or simply trading one kind of risk for another? So that was kind of the core or the heart of the story that I was trying to capture. Okay, let's see. If anybody has questions, reminder to put them in the chat and I'll answer them as we go. How do you consistently draw the unique stories and perspectives from interviews to ensure your profile stands out against the others written about them? So there's a lot of writers who don't like to read anything written about that person before they go into reporting their story because they think it'll cloud their judgment or they'll have a bias or something like that. I don't do that. I read everything. I want to know everything that's been written, everything that he said in public, so I don't ask him about the same things he's already commented on, things like that. And it also helps me kind of have a hypothesis of why Saquon is doing what he's doing. In this case, there were no long form profiles of Saquon until mine. So I didn't really have something that had already been written or a narrative that had already been kind of put out there. Um, which is crazy. You would think that like a star NFL player. Anyway, there hadn't been one, and there certainly hadn't been one on Saquon the investor. So it was like kind of the perfect time to write this. And the way that I make sure my profiles stand out from other things that have been written is you try to find a surprising angle. So here, the surprising angle is one of the biggest stars in the NFL is spending his time off the field investing in venture startups. Like, what? And also, my goal was to get very specific numbers and to get what his portfolio actually looks like. And I was able to do that. So that's a little bit of an exclusive element and also access to Saquon himself. I think a lot of reporters these days, unfortunately, struggle with getting access to the subjects that they cover, whether it's from distrust or they just don't have the time, etc. And then I also the main thing is try to ask questions that get like below the surface. With Saquon, it was really interesting because I really think he came into it expecting a surface level, fluffy, dumb interview on my end. Like that I would ask him those surface level questions. And I came in with, your dad injured himself boxing in 1992, which prevented him from having a professional career. Did that ever like play a role in how you see yourself? And he was just like, what? He's like, how did you know that? The how did you know that? And the, oh, wow, you really did your research. Like that's a really good sign that you're on the right path. Um, and it actually took me a while with Saquon. Usually, I would say it took me longer with him than it normally does to peel back the layers because he was giving me surface level answers to things that I was trying to probe about. And the way you get past the surface level is you just ask the same question in a different way over and over again until he's like, oh, wait a second, you're asking about something deeper here, not just, you know, what the why I like investing in startups, surface level. Like I was like, but why really? So yeah, it's a mix of questions, asking the right questions, finding the right people, getting access to the subject, and doing your research. Shockingly, a lot of people don't do that these days. Okay, Chanel has a question. Any fun or surprising people who have reached out to you after you published that piece? Um, huh. Surprising people. Actually, I would say someone reached out from the VC community who said that they are in multiple group chats where like venture group chats where the article was being shared. And it's funny because you would think like, is this a sports article? Is this a investing article? But I thought that was funny because, like Saquon the investor actually probably has invested in some great startups that a lot of VCs would be jealous of. So I wonder if that's why it's been shared in these group chats. But yeah, it's been really cool to see the response. Grandpa and Grandma want to know how Leah and Sophia are doing. Excellent. All right. Okay, you heard a lot of stories about Saquon during the reporting process. Which one revealed the most? Hmm. Um, there was I think the story I interviewed Brian Singerman, who's a venture capitalist. He is now out on his own, but he was previously at Founders Fund, and he said there was a symposium in Montana full of CEOs and billionaires and entrepreneurs. So, a great networking place for someone like Saquon, right? Um, so he was invited. He went. He spent the day listening, meeting people, asking questions, learning. And Brian told me, he was like, I kind of expected him to come for the dinner and just leave after that. And he did. He came for the day and the dinner. And then he got on a plane and took a red eye to Philadelphia because he had a speaking engagement the following morning there, and then got back on that plane and came back to Montana to spend the next day with at the symposium talking to people. So and after that, he took a midnight flight to make it to his daughter's soccer game. So it was a lot of this, but the reason that's really powerful is because what it told Brian, or what it signaled to somebody like Brian, is that Saquon's serious and he takes this very seriously. And it's not just transactional, right? Like if it was transactional, he would just go to the dinner and then leave and say, I did my FaceTime. I can go now. So Brian told me that stuff is impossible to fake. That stuff meaning relationship building, investing in startups, things like that. All right, let me just look here 1 second. Someone asked, can you share how you did the article step by step? Oof. Yeah, I usually like to start with interviewing everybody that I could get my hands on around. It's like concentric circles. I go outside and then go in, and get closer and closer to their inner circle. And then I save the subject for last. So Saquon was the last person that I interviewed, not the first. You want, or at least I want, all of my information and all of my research done before I get to that person. Um, so I started with his childhood friend, so I could hear how, what he was like playing high school football. Then I talked to James Franklin, who's the head coach at Penn State, where he went. What was he like there? Then I talked to JJ Watt and Russ Okung to get a more contemporary perspective on who he is as a competitor today. They both invest. What is he like as a peer in the investing world? And then finally I interviewed him. Um, but yeah, and then I don't write an order, so I maybe write one section, or I start at the end and make my way to the beginning. Um, I submit my draft to my editor gives it back. I do more reporting or trying to answer her questions. Then I send it back, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, until I finally get to a good place where I'm like, this is publishable. And in that process, I identify some gaps of, oh, something's missing here, somebody's voice is missing there, and you're just trying to kind of like piece it together. But it's just like a living thing. And then the final part is a fact check. I've talked about this before, but I do a very, very thorough fact check of the entire article. Not only do I check every fact, but then I reach out to Saquon and his team and go over every single fact in the story to make sure either they want to, like, something's incorrect, like, no, I wasn't born in 1988 or whatever it is, or if they want to offer a comment on something they disagree with, I'll include that too. Okay, Brent. Hello, Brent. Do you consider the trait of curiosity to be one that can be worked on, or is it something you're most likely born with? Um, well, it's probably a mix. I think that you have some natural curiosities that you are born with. If you ask my mom, she will tell you that I was a very nosy child, nosy meaning curious. But I wanted everybody's business. I wanted to understand what everybody was talking about. Um, even if they were adults, that wasn't part of the conversation. But I think there's some people who are naturally curious, but I do think that curiosity can develop, especially if it's in your area of interest. So when I talked to James Franklin, the head coach of Penn State, he told me something interesting about Saquon, which is that he was one of very few guys on the team genuinely curious about things outside of football. So, like, if you're good at your craft, you're probably going to be curious about your specific area of expertise. Saquon was somebody who was curious about everything else. And his childhood friend attributed it to his dad. He was like, if you talk to his dad is like a philosopher. So that's probably a little bit genetic and environmental in how he grew up. And then he developed it further when, for example, James Franklin, his head coach at Penn State, got the players together and said, don't let the game of football use you. Make sure you use the game of football to build generational wealth. That's something that stuck with him. And he was looking for ways and like curious about ways that he could do that for his own family. James Franklin then told me a story about he came home. His wife was on the phone for a very long time. And James was like getting ready for bed. He brushed his teeth. He showered. He got in bed. She was still talking. And he asked her, like, who were you talking to? And she was like, oh, Saquon. He called me because he knows that we're very into real estate. And he wanted to just ask about how a deal works, how you structure it. He's working on his first real estate deal. So, like, I found that fascinating. Like, it's not something he does for show. It's not something he does for the cameras. He's just a genuinely curious person. But yeah, I think that it can be cultivated, but it can't be forced. If you're curious about something, you will find ways to learn about it, whether it's YouTube, taking classes, asking people in your network, and you're resourceful and scrappy. I don't think you can force curiosity on someone that doesn't have it. My mom just commented that I was nosy as a child. I know. I'm telling you guys. Okay. Someone asked, in your profiling experience, what comes naturally for you to map the relationship made? Hold on a second. To map the relationship. I think that this is maybe a typo. Um, so if I'm assuming you're asking, like, how do you map, like, who's in the outer circle, inner circle, like, how do you decide who to talk to? That's a great question. Um, the way I do it is just, like, first, when you do the research, you see who's spoken on the to profile wait. Oh, yeah, that's right, that's right. When you do the research, you see who's commented on the record, who Saquon says he's close to, things like that. So you make kind of like a map of people, and you see like looser connections, stronger connections. Um, what have his parents said on the record? That was really telling and really interesting to me, because those are the people who know you best. What are they willing to say to the press? So yeah, I I kind of started with like the looser connections, right? Like people in the NFL, industry experts, venture advisors, people like that. And then as I worked my way in, I could tell those people, hey, I've already talked to these outer people. I would love to have your voice in it next. And so then when I reached out to his business manager and his who else? Like childhood friend, and like the people who were like there with him through it all, like you start to hear patterns and things about him that paint a picture of who he is. So by the time you talk to Saquon or your subject, you already kind of have an idea of what people say about him, and then you see how he responds to that, if that makes sense. Okay, let's see. Knowledge map. Yeah, okay. Do you have a profile? Do you have a profile for the profile? How do you choose who to interview next? How do I choose? I choose based on personal curiosity mainly, but also who has an interesting story that I feel like hasn't been told recently or at all or correctly. Somebody who has been like kind of misunderstood by the media maybe. In that case, Anthony Scaramucci fit that perfectly. He was also someone who, like, I was curious about how his Bitcoin bet had paid off, things that hadn't been reported. He had kind of been misunderstood, and I felt like I could do a good job humanizing this person. Um, with Ryan Serhant, I knew that there was more to the puppy dog charisma, everybody loves me internet story. And I was curious about that because you don't build an empire in a cutthroat industry like real estate by being super nice. And I was right because he said that he is fueled by revenge, which is not nice. So it's like things like that with Saquon, it was unexpected again, right? Like an NFL player being a good investor. Like, how does that happen? So it's usually there's two points, and I want to connect them, and it's not always like a linear line, a linear path, a linear path. It's like kind of a winding story of how they got there. Okay, let's see. What pushback have you gotten from profile subjects for any of the profiles you've written so far? By the way, love your work. Michael, let's knock on wood. I have not gotten pushback yet. I actually am proud of the fact that I haven't had a correction yet because I think of the fact check process. They largely know all the facts that are going to be in the story. I and I I'm not the type of person who goes into a profile, spends a day with you, interviews all these people, does all this research, and then you're shocked by the way it came out. Like, I'm pretty honest throughout the process about the themes that I'm noticing and the story that I want to tell. So it's never a surprise to the person, even if there are parts that they don't necessarily like want to read about or want to see. Like in the Ryan Serhant article, the way I end it is with him talking about how, you know, he has regrets and his success has come at a cost of his personal life. And things like that that are, I'm sure, not fun to read about. But if they're true or if they resonate, then it's like, yeah, and again, also that was my impression after spending all that time with him and talking to all these people. So, there's part of that. But yeah, so far so good. Don't jinx me. Okay. How do you get in contact with everyone in the subject circle? I stalk. No, most people are happy to talk, especially if they know that the subject has given you access. Um, One of the most common questions I get is people ask me if the person is participating in the piece. And if they are, I say yes. If they're not, I say no. But so far, all three of the long form profiles I've published in the last year, they have participated. So that's made it easier to get in contact with people. Also, what I do is when I talk to someone, I ask them who they think a good person for me to talk to would be. And then they give me a name and a number. So that's helpful, like kind of word of mouth. Um, and let's see, I also do a lot of like LinkedIn and Twitter DMing and surprisingly effective. I mean, like Russ Okung, I DM'd on Twitter and he responded, and I got to interview him for this because I think if they know what you're working on and if they have a point of view, like it's perfect for somebody like Russ to talk about um Saquon Barkley, investing in Bitcoin. JJ Watt, I had already interviewed, so I just emailed him and I said, "Hey, working on this. Would you like to participate?" I think as you do more of these, you build more relationships and it's easier to convert those people into future resources for sources. Um, okay, let's see. Andy said, "Thank you for doing this AMA. You're an awesome porter. Thank you. And I love your work and the articles you surface." What a nice comment. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Michael said, "What books have you read that made a big impression on you, either personally or professionally?" So many books. I like memoirs. I'm almost done. It's a 600-page book, to be fair, but it's taken me a while. Um, the Barbara Walters memoir called Audition. Books like that have a really big influence on me because I remember certain moments and certain things that they chose to highlight, and it reminds me of a profile in that, yes, a profile's short, a profile's written by somebody else, whereas a memoir is largely, well, they often have ghostwriters, but largely what the person wants to focus on. And I thought it was interesting that most celebrity memoirs are written as fluff pieces, unless you're Henry, what am I saying? Prince Harry. Unless you're Prince Harry and you have that ghostwriter who won't let you off the hook and let you only publish a fluff piece, most of them are just like a nothing burger. They're just like, here are all the times I succeeded. And it's like a highlight reel on Instagram in a book, which I don't like to read. The reason the Barbara Walters one is so good is that she opens it and goes on to highlight all of the imperfections, failures, personal like mistakes. It's so honest to the point where you're like, this is too honest, but I love hearing this because it's real and you believe her. um, like when they asked her, why did you like why do you work so much? She didn't say, because I'm a feminist and I believe in whatever. She said, because my dad, my whole childhood had a very volatile income stream and we could never rely on him for money. So I had to make sure that I had a steady, stable job where I could make my own money. It was like out of necessity, not out of admiration. And I'm this amazing person taking on this cause. So, like, those are things that I appreciate. And that's part of why I love writing profiles is to humanize this person. They're not Saquon isn't like an icon, idol. What he is a regular person who was really damn good at football, and now he's like getting his feet wet in investing. And it's like, how did he do it? And there's a lot of mistakes he made, a lot of things that went wrong. But it's like that's what people want to know. It's not necessarily just about your successes. Okay. How do you go about structuring your story? What are the key elements in your outline that you must have and are never optional? Okay. So I don't do an outline, which is crazy, I know. I have kind of like ideas or themes that I want to knit together. I don't always know how in the beginning, but I put them on the page and I'm like, I know I want this and I definitely want this. How they come together, I have no idea, but we will figure it out. And that's usually revealed in the reporting process, which is why I think like more people should write like that, because if you go in with a very set opinion on someone, you will come out biased. It's going to be one-sided. It's probably going to be a hit piece. So I like to kind of go in not knowing where it'll take me. So what are some key elements that are never optional? One thing that I always have to have in one of my profiles is a contradiction. I know that sounds weird, but, like, nobody is fully perfect in the regard of, "I believe this, and I only believe this in every area of my life." And this is why the Saquon story came out well, I think, is because he has so many paradoxes and contradictions that it was like, "How do I explain this without it sounding insane?" Um, but the contradictions in someone's life is what make them human. You can want to be great while also believing you maybe don't entirely deserve what you have. And it's like capturing those little nuances. One thing that I found fascinating about Saquon is I don't think that he had consciously connected some dots yet. So when we had our conversation, he was like, "Wow, it's so funny you asked me that because I was literally just thinking about that this morning." One of the things that I found interesting that he hadn't ever connected is that his dad was almost a professional boxer. He was really, really good in the 90s, but then he popped his shoulder and like couldn't get it fixed. It was really painful. It was an injury. He didn't have the money to get it fixed. And that's what ended his career. It wasn't by choice, it was by circumstance. And so I was like, oh, I mean, naturally, of course, Saquon's so focused on long term ownership and he's so concerned with building wealth for his family because one injury could end your career. And that's why he's um, so relentless about building generational wealth, you know? So when I asked him about that, he was like, no, I've literally never thought about that, like in this way. He's like, yeah, that happened to my dad, but it's never quite like I don't think that's why I do it. And I was like, huh, okay, well, that's interesting. So in the story, I couldn't say that this is why Saquon thinks this way, but his dad had said it. His dad said, my career ended because I literally didn't have access to capital. And that's why he tells his son, don't ever give up, keep pursuing your passion, build wealth so you can pursue that passion. So it's like pretty clear, but I think I think it's just an interesting little quirk that to outsiders it looks a certain way, but Saquon himself maybe never quite consciously like was aware that maybe when he got injured in 2020, that's when he turned to investing. That's when it became urgent for him. So yeah, so I like the humans aren't simple beings. And I like capturing the complexity and the contradictions and the things that you say one thing, but then you do something different. I've mentioned this before, Anthony Scaramucci, where I was like, are you doing this for redemption? You want people to be like, damn, he was right. He was like, no, I'm not doing this for redemption. I don't care what people think about me. And then I turn my head and I see a bobblehead of him that says, "Fuck you, we won." That is redemption. That is like or you getting validated that you won. So it's like a lot of times the reason I like to get access to the person I'm profiling is because you see whether their words match their actions. Okay. Oh my goodness. Hi, Matt. There's so many people in here. Okay, great. Um, Brent said, humans are complicated, and that's what makes each person's story so interesting. I agree. Very much agree. I don't like the polished. There's so many profiles that I don't include in my newsletter because they're not, I mean, it's just reading fiction. It's like you start reading it and it's so polished. It's so perfect. If you notice, every time it's like a beautiful A-list celebrity, they often start the profile with, and then she ordered cheese fries and a burger and she got ketchup all over her face. And like, all this stuff to make them seem more human. It's like, that's not what's going to make them seem human and relatable. What's going to make them seem human and relatable are the things that we all do, and like the contradictions, and he told me this, but then he did that. Her mom told me this, and then I saw her, not doing that. So I think, like, a lot of reporters don't do the work necessary to truly humanize someone. The messy burger on the face is not gonna make me feel like I relate to Sydney Sweeney, but, like, her, actually, this is a really, a really good example. There was a recent profile of Sydney Sweeney in the Wall Street Journal, and I thought that there would be more about the reporter went with Sydney to a pottery class. They spent time together in real life. It wasn't just a phone interview. It wasn't just, an email interview or something. And so I was really hopeful that they got a lot of, like, juicy details, especially after that scandal with the jeans had just happened. There was one line in there about the scandal which said, like, she will not talk about it. I understand that. But even if a subject doesn't want to talk about something, your job as the reporter, in my opinion, is to capture the little nuances in body language and things that arise that kind of, like, wink, wink, hint, hint to the reader. This is kind of how they feel about it. So when you ask Sydney about, hey, what about that ad with the jeans? What do you think? And the public reaction, when she says, I don't want to talk about it, did she look away? Did she take a breath? Was she uncomfortable? Did she change the subject? There's so many things you could observe with your eyes that would make that so good. So I think, like, those little details with Anthony Scaramucci, I asked them about his childhood. Clearly was rocky. His dad was physically abusive. That was the only topic he wouldn't talk to me about. But it was in the way that he completely changed his tone. It was like a different, body language. He was kinda, like, guarded, uncomfortable, and then he changed the only thing he said about it was, "I donate to this organization that helps kids who are in domestic violence, situations." Okay, like, you take that and then it signals to the reader, yes, Anthony Scaramucci is this, like, showman, he's charismatic, he's very, very fun to be around, but hit on something like that, like, he will shut down. And then he mentioned something about, like, I can't meditate because it brings up all that childhood stuff. Okay, amazing. That is a detail that tells me more about you than if you had told me this long story about what happened. So yeah, anyway, I went off on a tangent on that one. But yes, I feel very passionately about, you can ask the question, get nothing, but still observe and be a human being and empathize or get details that are more telling than just what they say with their words. So you don't just say, she said no comment. You say, she looked away, like, got uncomfortable in her seat and did not want to continue the conversation or something like that. Okay. Keep putting your questions in here and then I'll keep going with the ones I got. Um let's see. This one we answered. Okay. How did Saquon convince you he's truly an investor? It wasn't Saquon himself, it was the people I talked to around him. So when there's, like, a playbook that they have, when he is excited about a company, him and his business manager, when they're excited about a company, they reach out to the founder themselves, which is a pretty unusual approach for a professional athlete. They say, we want to be in this round. We want to invest in your company. Then they invite the founder to dinner with Saquon. There, Saquon kind of plays interrogator. He asks the founder about he asks them about their business, their values, their goals. It's like more of the human element is what he tries to understand. And then he, if he likes the founder and the company, he gives a verbal commitment. He says, sure, yep, I will invest in your startup. And then they go off and negotiate the deal behind closed doors with Saquon and the whole team there. But I think so. Okay, so and then after he's invested in a company, he really goes to work for them. Hold on one second. He literally, like, for Ramp, for that company, he was in a Super Bowl commercial with Strike, the payments app. He used it to convert his marketing dollars into Bitcoin. All of that, like, promotional stuff that he does, he's working to boost his own stake. His own equity gets more valuable as he does this. So I think the way I got convinced that he was an investor is that he is investing. He is as helpful, if not more, than some of these other traditional investors who invest in these companies. So I think his thinking is, if I'm going to promote this anyway, I might as well have ownership in it. And I think that that's what's so interesting. Let's see. How do you feel when you're asking uncomfortable questions in an interview? Um, I don't so the way I approach the interview is more like a conversation. So it doesn't feel like an interview necessarily. Like, if you're talking to me, I sound like myself. So, for example, if Saquon says something and I think that's contradictory to what he did or what he previously said, I'll tell him, I'll be like, oh, wait, but in 2021, I read that you said blah, blah, blah. Is that, how do you square that? Like, it's more coming out of curiosity than well, that's inconsistent with what you've said. I think, I think actually Barbara Walters was very good at towing that line of, I'm going to be firm, but I'm going to be like a person. You felt the need to answer her questions, but it was coming from a human place instead of a gotcha place. So I don't feel bad. I certainly don't feel bad, but I also don't feel like I'm trying, because I'm not trying. It's not a gotcha interview. It's just like well, I'm just curious. And I think people are smart enough to know the difference. I think you know when somebody's asking you questions out of judgment, and I think you know when a person's asking you questions out of curiosity. Okay. Why did equity become his obsession? I think he sees equity as control, and football reminded him of fragility and impermanence. For example, which he got injured, one injury could end your career. A franchise decision with what happened with the Giants and Saquon, that could certainly derail your career. The way he played it was good, but it could have gone a different way. Um, and then also just like the unexpected, like his position as running back has one of the shortest shelf lives in the NFL. It's 3 years on average. He's already beaten the odds, but he knows that it's a very precarious, short-lived position. So I think knowing all of that, you think, I need to have control in other places in my life. And also, like, let's not forget, Saquon didn't grow up rich and famous. He grew up in the Bronx with his parents. He has 4 other siblings. And when they moved to Philadelphia when he was in elementary school, they got evicted. He had to spend time living with different family members for 8 months because the shelter system wouldn't accept dads. It was a whole situation that he went through. Um, when I asked him about it, he said, "It's not like we were on the street. We lived with family. I never felt like we didn't have enough." But he certainly knew, he told me, that it did shape his perspective on what he wanted to do with his kids. And what he wants to do with his kids is teach them financial literacy and, like, one of their family values or themes is we are building something long lasting. We are building generational wealth. So he sees equity as something that he can pass on to his kids and then his grandkids, and it can compound over time, which to him is more powerful than just saying, "Hey, your dad was a really good football player back in the day. Now we don't have that much money, but back in the day." So I think he's just like very focused on what can I hand to you beyond just legacy of football. Okay. How does his portfolio compare to LeBron James or Serena Williams or Kevin Durant's? I noted in the article that he is investing differently than other um, professional athletes with venture firms because usually the playbook is I'm only going to invest in like things where I have um tremendous influence or I understand a lot. So like supplements, fitness products, things like that. You'll see a lot of athletes investing in, but you'll rarely see them investing in like he has he has Anthropic, Anduril, Ramp Cognition, Neuralink, Strike, Polymarket. Like, those are technology companies where an athlete, it's not necessarily like a huge value add for these companies because they focus on something else. But he can, talk about them, promote them, be in their Super Bowl ads, talk about Ramp and how they're helping small business owners, like things like that. I think I think when I talked to his business manager, Ken Katz, he told me we are very contrarian. We only invest in tech startups. I told him no supplements, no clothing lines. Like, don't do what everybody else is doing, basically. And then I also spoke with Kevin Durant's business manager, Rich Kleiman, and Rich told me that Kevin used to invest in startups, but then their strategy over time, as they've professionalized a little bit, uh, they're more towards like safer asset classes like real estate and private equity. They invest later stage because it's not as much volatility and because like as you kind of grow and professionalize, your strategy changes. Whereas Saquon is more of like a cowboy in the investing world. It's just him and his business manager and a financial advisor, and they just invest in tech companies that excite them. And Ken Katz has a pretty big network of VCs that he's built where he's like, "What do you like right now? Like, what do you," and he's constantly asking that. So I think Saquon has just like, it's much more surgical and not as professional. And of course, like Saquon has, diversified into safer things like the S&P 500, real estate, stock market, things like that, but not as like venture is it's that one bucket that he is personally excited about. Okay. Any other questions? No? Let me see here. What did this teach you about how he thinks about risk? Okay, I thought that his answer to risk was really interesting. Um, When I asked him about risk, so risk was one of the things I was like, how does he think about this? Because that's the one thing I couldn't necessarily get from the people around him. I needed Saquon to tell me how he thinks about risk. And risk in his case is like you have to take risks if you're going to be at his level in the NFL. He's constantly taking risks, right? But like I said in the beginning, To him, investing is like a risk that it feels more within his control. Um, and so I was like, he said, I forget what the quote is, but it's really good. He's like, I mean, I'm not one to jump in the pool with the sharks, but I also have a little bit of a I don't give a you know what. Like, I care that it's risky, but I'm not gonna stand back and watch on the sidelines because I'm afraid of risk. He's not afraid of risk. And he compared, because I was like, it's risk. It's risky. Bitcoin's risky. Venture's risky. It's volatile. And the way he described it to me is like, he's like, anything is volatile. Um, Playing in the NFL, when he got to the Philadelphia Eagles, he was like, the first week, everybody was like, amazing. Thank you, Giants, for giving us Saquon. He's the best. We love him. And then the second week, he dropped the ball. And everybody was like, go back to New York. We don't want you here. So it's like he's seen the volatility in that regard. So for him, he likens it to Bitcoin's wild swings, right? So I don't think he's necessarily like scared of it. Okay. Interesting comment on KD. Unsexy investments generally become more fashionable as you get older. That is very true. And it's important to note, Saquon is not investing in seed rounds or even Series A or probably Series B, maybe. He's he's not investing in early stage startups. He's investing in much later. So the lowest valuation that I saw him invest in his portfolio is 100 million. So that's an established company at that point. Some of them were over a billion when he invested, and he typically writes checks between 250K and 500K. So it's not like he's taking massive risks. Like, he could be going in seed rounds of companies. But so I guess the return isn't that attractive, but he has 10x his money in some of these cases so far on paper. But I agree with you. Okay. Yeah, Philly fans as the benchmark for volatility is probably a good marker. Um, Somebody asked, during the crypto crash, did he doubt himself? So during the 2022 crypto disaster, he did, because he had put $10 million into $10 million of marketing dollars of his marketing money, converted into Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin crashed to below. So Saquon bought 32,000. Bitcoin crashed to below 16,000. And at that point, his investment was like underwater. It was like below, I think, 50%, whatever, 16. Yeah. Um, and he called Ken Katz, his business manager, and he was like, what is going on? And he told him, this is part of the volatility cycle. Just hold on. He listened to him. And then he held, and now that $10 million income stream is worth $35 million at today's Bitcoin price. So yes, yes, so far it's paid off, but of course there's these big dips and crashes and corrections with Bitcoin. I saw recently in an interview, somebody asked him about, like, do you regret not putting your entire contract into Bitcoin back in the day? And he said that Michael Saylor told him to do that, but he didn't do it. And yes, he does regret it, but there's a reason that, like, things happen for a reason, and he's glad that he only did the marketing dollars. Okay. Let's see. What other questions do I have here? What lessons can a non-athlete take away? I think that, yes, like, this is an athlete story, but I think it's a broader story in that you don't have to be constrained to the thing that you do being your main driver of income. If that makes sense. You can be curious about other sectors, you can learn about other things. When I was a reporter at Fortune, 100% of my salary was paid to me by Fortune, so if they ever decided to get rid of me, 100% of my income was gone. When I started working for myself, I realized, like, you can write the newsletter, you can have subscription revenue, you can have speaking revenue, you can write a book and have book revenue, you can do syndication deals and get syndication revenue. And it's like all these different income streams. So if three dry up, I still have two more. You know what I mean? It's not like all of my eggs were in one basket. And I think that's partly what Saquon's trying to do. He knows right now is the moment. He knows he's hot. He knows everybody wants to work with him. He knows he will never be this popular again. So that's why he's doing it right now instead of waiting for the end of his career. And I think like striking while the iron is hot is a good strategy for a lot of people. Also ownership. I think if you can build ownership in something, it's way more valuable than working for somebody else. Or even if you work for somebody else, you can invest. Just having a piece of something that you own is probably a good strategy. And also the final thing is like surround yourself with great people that you trust who are really, really smart. Um, and smart in like ways that you are not. I was watching the Charlie Sheen documentary last night on Netflix, and I think a big part of his downfall was surrounding himself with people who just wanted to make money off of Charlie Sheen, and they did not actually care about Charlie Sheen. So I think like Saquon says, I never want to be the smartest person in the room. That's a good mentality when you are making really big decisions in your career, in your life. And the wrong people can lead you down a really, really long road of destruction. um, Somebody said, will his model become the default for athletes? Okay, and before I give this answer, if you guys have any other questions, let me know, because it's been an hour, so I don't know if you guys have any more time with me today, but if you have any other questions, I'd be glad to answer. So will his model become the default for athletes? I do think so. I say that because um we've all seen the stat of like 78% of athletes go bankrupt or face financial distress after their careers end. And that's kind of an old statistic, I gotta say. Like, I think that they are way more savvy now, and it's more acceptable for athletes to be doing things off the field than it is, because before it was like, you're not focused. And now it's like, yeah, gotta figure out ways to make money when this ends. So I do think that investing and um building companies, things like that, I think more athletes will see themselves as owners instead of just endorsers in the future. When I was talking to JJ Watt, I asked him, like, in your time in the NFL, have you seen a shift in why and how these athletes are like more interested in companies and investing and things like that? And he was like, yes. In the locker room, it used to be talking about like who bought this house and like this whatever, but now it's more impressive to talk about what's it who like what does your portfolio look like. And I thought that was so interesting that like in the locker room they're showing each other like cap tables and who's texting with what founder. So I do think that culture is a big part of it. If it's sexy, if it's popular, more people will be interested in it. And if it's not, it's not. But I do think it's become normalized for them to have other interests outside of football while still playing football. And without the fans saying, you're not focused because you're investing in startups. Um, and then let's see, what else did I want to mention? I do think that there are good examples of Saquon, Kevin Durant, in the NFL, JJ Watt, Russ Okung, of people who saw like Russ had this amazing quote where he said, "Why be the talent when you can be management?" And he meant like, you know, for so many years, like the NFL extracted value out of athletes, and now athletes are kind of extracting value out of football in their prime years. Um, so yeah, so I think it's a good there's a good amount of people who understand that you can use football, something so fragile that you play for a certain amount of years, to build something permanent. Um, okay. Thank you guys so much for all the thoughtful questions. I will, I think, save this as a video and I will post it somewhere if you want to look back. But this was really good. If you want to read the Saquon article and you haven't read it yet, it's on the profile, readtheprofile.com, and it's called Saquon Barkley is Playing for Equity. And also, just comment and let me know, like, who do you want me to profile next? I'm always on the hunt for interesting people um with like more mass appeal, whose story I think I can tell better than what the legacy media has done. Thank you guys.